On Salam Media, your home of humanitarian journalism. We're streaming live at salammedia.com and on our various social media pages. It's just after 8 a.m. on Thursday, the 19th of June, 2025. And we begin with breaking developments from the Middle East as missiles continue to exchange and intensify in between Iran and Israel. The world watches what could quickly escalate into a full scale regional war. And in the past 24 hours alone, Israel launched airstrikes on Iran's Arak heavy water reactor, reportedly damaging the site without radiation leakage. Tehran responded by launching a fresh salvo of missiles, prompting shelter warnings across Israeli cities. The US is in the conversation again. Donald Trump now. He's back in the White House. He left the G7 meeting in Canada a bit early. He came out in the Oval Office and has declared Iran's supreme leader an easy target and is openly mulling a potential U.S. military strike. Inside Iran itself, 5 alleged Mossad operatives have been arrested, while Israel claims to have killed nuclear scientists and hit weapons development sites inside Tehran. The stakes, well, nothing less than nuclear containment, regional stability, and the risk of direct confrontation between global powers, especially with Russia questioning the US not to intervene and President Putin offering to mediate. Now, joining us to unpack this deepening crisis in the Middle East is Bilal Bassiouni, the CEO and founder of the Center for Africa and Near East Studies. He's a seasoned analyst, and he'll be taking us some of the notable events that have taken place in the last 48 24 hours between Iran and Israel. Mr. Bassiouni, assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me, and good morning to your listeners.
Pleasure's all ours. I think we can kickstart the conversation with, what is the latest verified picture we have of the situation on the ground. In the last 24 hours, from the strikes on Iraq, to Iran's missile retaliation, how can you, just for our listeners, unpack what is increasingly becoming a very, very volatile situation in the Middle East that could, just turn the whole region into further instability?
Yes, I think you really gave a great introduction there, covering a lot of the latest dynamics that we're seeing. But if you would like to put it under a theme of what we've been seeing since since the start of this episode of the conflict, if you want to say, what we're seeing is Iran under intense pressure, but it's still holding its ground. Despite the scale of the Israel strikes and the loss of senior commanders that we saw in the earlier days of the attacks, Iran has shown it can hit back hard and can hit back directly, and still manage the escalation. Its leadership were quite shaken in the first few hours of those of the Israeli attacks on Iran, but the leadership structures still do remain intact. Its nuclear infrastructure has taken also significant damage, but it's unlikely to derail so far those strikes to derail its nuclear program completely, especially if sites like the Fordow sites continues to function, and Iran's overall deterrent posture, while tested, it's still not broken. So the message so far appears that Iran is not going to concede under fire. Now, again, this defiance combined with the resilience across its security and its political apparatus means that the region is likely now to move into a phase of long term tit for tat attacks with Israel, which is slowly but surely expanding to include other actors. As you've rightly mentioned, Iraq was one of the theaters that was drawn into the conflict yesterday, and we're likely to see more and more theaters grow over the coming few days.
Mm, mm, mm. the focus, I think, when it comes to Israel, will always be on their air defense systems. The Israeli Iron Dome has been touted to be, one of the foremost, military defense systems in the world. Is literally at the heart of Israel's air defenses. It is part of a larger system, that comprises of a multi-layered, almost integrated air defenses. How do we look at it and unpack it? Because I think for the first time, it has been tested to its limits. We've seen strikes coming from the Houthis earlier on in the year. We've seen strikes coming from Hamas, and it seemed like it dealt with those with relative ease. How can we assess, how it is done with the latest spat with Iran?
So the Iron Dome, as they call it, or Israel's air defense system, has shown strong capabilities and high levels of success, particularly against non-state actor forms of technology and weaponry. Now, Iran comes with a completely different war package, if you want to call it that, and sophistication. Its technological advancement and its variety of weapon selection that it can use and enforce into this conflict is quite significant and actually quite also has proven its successes against Israel's Iron Dome. From the first day of engagement, we've seen it saturate Israel's iron defense systems through targeting a concentration of missiles and barrages coming out from Iran and hitting sites in Israel. Many of those still being intersected by the Israel's Iron Dome, but because of the saturation and the nature of the strikes so far, a lot still go through, and the impact of those are quite also significant in terms of the collateral damage and the spread of the damage that they cause. So we've seen a lot of direct hits, particularly those targeted around the headquarters of ministries, the Ministry of Defense in Tel Aviv. This is still early days also in the conflict. We still don't know. There's a lot of unverified claims around hypersonic ballistic missiles within Iran's arsenal that we still may see come out so long as the conflict is prolonged. But from what we've seen, at least Iran can manage its response in a similar manner, at least for a very long period of time, where at least a few high capability strikes manage to penetrate Israel's defense system and make direct hits.
I want us to take a quick break, just something quick, a quick stinger. But when we come back, I want us to focus on the United States of America and Donald Trump's, language, which has become increasingly volatile. I mean, just yesterday you called the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, an easy target, and literally saying, "I may do it," or "I may not do it." So I think we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, we'll focus on that U.S. element and also just the involvement of countries like Russia and China potentially if it does reach that level.
And when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, yet many children go to school hungry because of poverty. Penny Appeal South Africa's Breakfast Club aims to get a warm, hearty meal to underprivileged children so they can spend their day prospering in their schoolwork. Help feed a needy learner for only 5 Rand a day, or 150 Rand a month. Or visit our website www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573 to find out how you can donate. Penny Appeal South Africa. Small change, big difference.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042 203 1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Gaza needs your support more than ever. Homes have been shattered and families have lost everything. With your support, our teams are delivering clean water tankers, feeding the hungry, and assisting orphans who have no one left. Let us give Gaza whatever help we can. African Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, bakkies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwidiri. We're still in conversation this morning with Bilal Bassiouni. He's the CEO and founder of the Center for Africa and Near Studies, and we're unpacking the rapidly escalating conflict between Iran and Israel. In the first part of our discussion, we focused on the military developments on the ground, the airstrikes, and the bombing and Iran's missile response, the Iron Dome itself, and assessing how impactful it has been. But now we're going to turn our attention to the United States of America, where its president, Donald Trump, has injected a new level of uncertainty in this conflict, threatening strikes, calling for Iran's unconditional surrender, and flouting the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. Bilal, thank you so much for staying with us. We're going to be shifting the lens to Washington, Trump, and just the potential global fallout their involvement could have. What do you make of Donald Trump's, involvement in this conflict, his language, which has become increasingly volatile, calling the supreme leader of Iran as an easy target and saying, I may do it, I may not do it. How do we read this ambiguity? Do you think it's a deliberate posturing or just a genuine indecision in Washington because of how war in the Middle East and the United States of America has been received in the last few years by Americans themselves?
Yes, a great question. In my view, Trump's messaging, deliberate or not, reflects a dangerous and a high-risk strategy. So on one hand, he's issuing veiled threats to personally target the supreme leader. This language is rarely used by US presidents or even presidents, period. On the other hand, he's keeping the door open to negotiation. So it's the carrot and the stick kind of situation there. So that dual posture may be aimed at to maximize pressure on Iran. But at the same time, it blurs those red lines, which is why I think it's really dangerous. So when you speak about taking out a head of state, even hypothetically, the danger is you strip away the ambiguity that often helps prevent escalation. So it forces the other side to assume the worst and respond accordingly. So this kind of rhetoric, especially in the context of this volatile and fast developing conflict, reduces the room for diplomacy, but also increases the likelihood of any dangerous misstep. So Iran's leadership is unlikely to concede to this kind of personal threat. It is more likely to actually entrench itself further. So while Trump thinks that this strengthens the U.S. leverage around the conflict or around Iran and the nuclear developments, it also raises the stakes in ways that are very hard to walk back from.
I think a very, very important point that you're making there. Speaking of, superpowers, there's been an involvement of another one or a potential thereof. Russia has stepped in diplomatically. They are offering to mediate in this conflict. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think Moscow genuinely, has the credibility and leverage to de-escalate the situation, or is this, geopolitical theater that we always see unfolding?
No, I don't think it's more than rhetoric at this stage. I don't think Iran can expect direct interventions, at least from Russia or from other trade partners such as China. Russia would be gleaning at this moment for the possibility of drawing the U.S. into a war of attrition, similar to what the U.S. did to it in Ukraine. However, this does not necessarily mean that Russia will come to the rescue or necessarily deploy forces similar to what it did in Syria, for example, or in other African countries to support the stability of the administration or the leadership there. This is unlikely to be the case. The stakes of that, of course, will be to be drawn into direct confrontation with the United States will be very high. Hence, a scenario. Of course, this is more in the long term. A scenario where Russia supplies Iran here and there with equipment and logistical networks could manifest. However, a scenario where Russia is drawn completely, where it's deployed in Iran or against U.S. assets and Israeli assets, that I don't think that's likely in the near future.
I want to focus on the region itself, the Middle East. There's a lot that has been said regarding their inaction when it comes to Israel and the genocide in Gaza. How would you assess, the preparedness of countries like Saudi Arabia, like the UAE and Turkey, for a drawn-out conflict, and maybe the role that they can potentially play in mitigating it? Is there an assessment? They've been fairly quiet, other than just issuing statements, but there hasn't been any solid kind of show of wanting, de-escalation and involvement in this conflict.
Yes, so there has been a lot of backroom diplomacy and actually quite substantial ones that have been undergoing over the past few hours, specifically over the past 48 hours, led by Qatar and Egypt to an extent. And particularly those two countries are likely to be very uncomfortable with the way this tit-for-tat conflict is going and the trajectory of this conflict, including Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as well. Despite being belligerents to Iran, they are also at this moment doing risk calculations around in the event if this conflict escalates beyond its current trajectory, how much collateral they will likely carry in that sense. Now, there's a particular variable that will determine their involvement. And when I'm talking here, I'm talking militarily. Of course, their main posture is now to de-escalate and to find a diplomatic resolution, which will likely be U.S. involvement in this conflict, direct U.S. involvement. In the event, the U.S. uses its bases in the Gulf to strike Iran, Iran may then deem those bases as legitimate targets to respond and retaliate against. And we've seen the rhetoric around that, and the direct action. It's no longer rhetoric. It's become unveiled threats coming out from Iran that if U.S. assets are being used to target us, we have the right to respond and to respond against those targets. So that draws in the Gulf, particularly the Gulf countries, into the conflict. This is something they are unlikely to be comfortable with and are likely to try and not make happen in the near future. So their main priority now is to de-escalate and to find levers and leverages for both sides to return back to to the negotiation table, particularly around the nuclear deal.
Mm,
The problem is the US and Israel see an opportunity for leadership change in Iran. How genuine that is, or how capable they are of actually making that happen, is still quite drawn out, and I think it's over exaggerated. But
mm,
because that this, if this view strengthens within both those administrations, they're likely to draw out this conflict as much as possible and try to push Iran into surrendering or regime change, which I think is not our baseline view, and it's not something that they're capable of doing in the short term.
No, definitely. Just in closing, I have two questions that I want to ask you. There's so much information. I think one thing about the new age of technology that we're living in is when there's conflicts of this kind, there's a flood of information. A lot of them might or might not be fake news, but it's very, very difficult, to filter through what's genuine and what's not. From your perspective, what would you say is, the most underreported or misunderstood part of this conflict that maybe our audience needs to hear right now? And also, just looking at your crystal ball, I know, no one can tell the future at this point, considering how volatile the situation is and how things change in 24 hours. But what can our audience and people in general, look forward to as this, conflict continues, unfolding, and the Middle East is seemingly deepened further into instability?
So, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with the last question first, and then come back to the information question. So, of course, it's very difficult to predict. This is we are in untested territories, as you know very well. Many people would be concerned about what the far-reaching implications of this conflict is, and rightfully so. There are still red flags flags that you can monitor to see which trajectory this conflict is likely to take. The main flag, as I mentioned earlier, is US involvement. The longer the US stays out of this conflict, the more possibility there is to return to diplomacy and a return to de-escalation. The moment the US is involved, and particularly involved with the strikes that are deemed against critical infrastructure in Iran, this would be a sign that this conflict is likely to take the second route, or the more doomsday scenario, if you want to call it that, where the conflict escalates and involves more and more partners and widens its jurisdictions. That will be one flag. The other flags of that you could monitor also is around the Strait of Hormuz and developments around, particularly if Iran wants to escalate from its side and close the strait. This will, of course, is a potential moment for increasing Iran's deterrence, but also drawing in a stronger reaction from its belligerents, including the US and Israel. So on the maritime field, there will be a lot of also indicators to follow. The involvement of Iran's allies in Iraq and in Yemen would be something else to monitor, particularly in the Red Sea from the Houthis, or direct attacks from Iraq onto Israel or onto US bases and assets. Basically, Iran reactivating its proxies or its support network within the region. That would be something else to monitor. Now, monitoring, as coming back to your first question, and hence I wanted to change the order of responding to it, is finding the information around these issues is not easy, and it's becoming more and more challenging. In fact, information is becoming a rare commodity in this day and age, primarily because of so much disinformation, propaganda coming out, and actually, quite frankly, from both sides. And I've been following Iranian news outlets and sources It's again, a lot of it is rhetoric, and a lot of it is propaganda, particularly around capabilities, and both sides, in fact, also speaking about um, um, playing down the damage of what the war has caused so far. Now, the truth is usually somewhere in between, and I would advise our listeners and our viewers today to really put on a critical lens when we view this conflict or any other conflict. In fact, there's a lot
Mm,
of interested parties in this development, and there's a lot of purposeful and deliberate misinformation coming out. So put on your critical lens, widen your horizon, read various sources, and as much as possible, credible sources. Of course, you may have seen, and this is something that I wanted to highlight, part of the disinformation, that this party is going to come into the conflict, such as I've read something about Pakistan availing nuclear weapons to Iran, or for instance, Russia is and China have sent warships to support Iran. This type of information is actually besides it being quite nonsensical, it's really making it's creeping into the space of lots of verifiable news sources also sometimes latching onto it for the sake of creating conversation and generating talk. So just be mindful of the sources that you're looking at and the credibility that's coming out.
No, definitely. I think we're going to leave on that note, Bilal. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really appreciate the insightful conversation that we had, and hope we chat in the not so distant future as, this complex destruction in the Middle East continues to unfold.
Looking forward to engaging with you again. Shukran so
There,
much.
there you go. That was Bilal Bassiouni, CEO of the Center for Africa and Near East Studies. You can continue the conversation with us on our various social media pages. Just search at Salam Media, or you can send us a message on WhatsApp. Our line there is 061 and as I mentioned, you can join the live streamed conversations, the interviews, again on YouTube, Facebook, and X. And you can tell us what you think about this past week, the capabilities of both Iran and Israel. We're seeing Israel being tested to its limits for the very first time. And Iran itself, do you think they'll be able, to sustain, a long war battle with Israel? Other partners, other parties that might potentially be involved, with obviously Israel having the United States of America and its Western allies, and Iran, having the likes of Pakistan and Iraq also, that might potentially also be involved. So there's a lot that's happening. I mean, before we went on air, there was a breaking update coming from southern Israel earlier today. The Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, it's a major hospital that serves approximately 1 million residents and also treats wounded Israeli military personnel, was evacuated following an Iranian missile strike. Israeli media reports say the evacuation was necessary due to the leakage of hazardous materials inside the hospital. This is a very, very critical development amid the ongoing conflict, and we are monitoring the situation quite closely. So, yeah, we'll keep you closely informed as more details emerge, and you can follow us on our various social media platforms to get the latest coming out of the Middle East. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. News and views will continue after this.